The phone rang. Phoebe looked at Heather confused. Are you going to answer that?" "Nah, don't bother," responded Heather. "It's just going to be that annoying creep again." "Huh?" asked Phoebe, even more confused. "What creep?" "Wait, I never told you about this guy?" She noticed the blank look on her friend's face, which basically answered her question. "It's just this guy who somehow got my number and has been leaving messages of him breathing heavily." "Oh my God!" exclaimed Phoebe, clearly startled. "Are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. No need to worry about it. I'm sure he'll stop calling eventually." Phoebe was about to continue the conversation, when the phone suddenly started ringing again. Heather's only response was to sigh, but Phoebe grumpily began walking towards the phone. "What are you doing?" yelled Heather, nervously. "I'm going to stop this creep from calling you." "Don't," started Heather, but Phoebe had already picked up the phone. "What do you want?" she yelled into the phone. "Who's this?" a raspy voice responded from over the phone. "I'm Heather's friend and I want you to stop calling her." "Oh, you're her friend," said the voice. "Then I'll certainly stop calling then." After that sentence was spoken, there was manic laughter over the phone. "Tell you what. If you open the front door, I'll never call again." "Fine," Phoebe stated as she slammed the phone down and she started walking toward the door. Heather realized what Phoebe was doing and began to protest. "No please, don't open the door." Phoebe rolled her eyes. "Chill, it's not like he's going to be there." She opened the door and revealed the completely empty porch. "See? I told you that there would be no one here." She closed the door and locked it. "Now the pervert won't call." Before she could finish, a man leaped out from inside the closet beside the door and plunged a knife deep into her chest. Blood started flowing from where she had been stabbed. Heather started screaming and began running upstairs while she heard the sound of footsteps coming quickly behind her. Then everything went black. Anne threw the remote over to the couch after pressing the power button and tried to ignore the glare that her best friend was giving her. "Dude, why did you turn off the movie?" asked Chloe. "We were just getting to the best part." "Because these movies are so stupid," Anne said as she rolled her eyes. "I mean, seriously, would you go and actually open the door?" "Well, no," Chloe admitted, "but if they didn't do that, then this awesome movie would exist. You and I have very different ideas of what's awesome." She started to get up to go to the kitchen when she realized that Chloe was still sitting on the couch, pouty. "Tell you what," she sighed, "how about we get some snacks and then we can continue watching the rest of your silly movie?" Chloe visibly perked up. "All right, let's see what we can find." She stood up and they both walked into the kitchen. Anne decided to have what she insists as the real movie experience, grabbing a bag of popcorn and threw it in the microwave. As she waited for it to finish and for Chloe to finish scrounging around for something to eat, she decided to continue the conversation that they were having before. "I honestly have no clue why you like these kinds of movie," she said as she pointed at the cover of the movie that they were watching. "They're either about some psycho stabbing teenagers or some demented doll forcing people to cut off their limbs." "Well, sure, some of these movies are total garbage, but that's just like any genre," Chloe responded. "If you dig enough, you'll find those masterpieces that will scare the crap out of you." Almost as if to prove her point, she grabbed a bag of pretzels that she had found in the back of the cupboards. And shrugged. "I guess they just aren't my cup of tea." The microwave decided to pick that moment to beep, which made the both of them jump. Anne grabbed the bag out of the microwave and poured its contents into a bowl. Contented with the smell of buttery popcorn, she began to head out of the kitchen along with Chloe. Chloe continued to walk a few steps, but quickly realized that Anne was no longer beside her. She turned around to find Anne standing in the doorway of the now darkened kitchen. "Hey Anne, everything okay?" asked Chloe, worried about her friend. "Yeah, I'm fine," she replied. "I just thought that I heard something." Chloe started laughing. "Wait a minute, Anne Douglas, are you trying to scare me?" "No, I'm not," she said gravelly. "I swear I heard something." "Must have been the wind," Chloe shrugged. Or maybe that movie did actually scare you. That movie scare me? Anne said defiantly, trying to pretend that she didn't see the smirk on her friend's face. No way something like that would ever scare me. Well, let's get back to the movie that totally isn't scaring you, she replied with a joking tone in her voice. Chloe had started to turn back around toward the living room when she saw what looked like a black glove wrap around Anne's ankle. Before she could yell to warn her, Anne was yanked backwards into the kitchen, making the bowl fly out of her hand and spill the popcorn everywhere. Anne started screaming and tried to get a hold on something, but all that she ended up doing was leaving nail marks on the wooden floor. Chloe ran up the stairs and into her bedroom, locking the door behind her. She sat on her bed, terrified and unsure of what to do next. Her cell was still downstairs and there was no phone upstairs, so she had no way to call the police. She was trying to keep her thoughts focused on surviving instead of panicking, when she heard the sound of footsteps slowly going up the stairs. She started to panic and grabbed the baseball bat that she kept under her bed for protection. "Stay back!" she yelled, "I have a gun." She was hoping that this thing would take her bluff, when she heard a knock on the door. She tightened her grip on the bat, when she heard a familiar voice. "Chloe? Are you okay?" "Anne, is that you?" asked Chloe, unsure of what was going on. "Yes, it's me," Anne responded. "I'm sorry, I was trying to scare you. I guess I went too far." "You think?" Chloe yelled angrily. She started to head toward the door when she thought of something. "Wait, what about the glove?" "Huh? What glove?" asked Anne, sounding extremely confused. "The glove that pulled you into the kitchen," Chloe told her, moving the bat up against her shoulder again. There was a brief pause before Anne responded, "There wasn't any glove pulling me back. I was just pretending that I was being pulled. You must have imagined it." Chloe tried to think if she could have imagined the glove, but she couldn't ignore the fact that her friend's voice was coming from behind the door, sounding fine, if not a bit out of breath. She dropped the bat and walked toward the door, pulling the chain through the lock. She opened the door and was shocked to see not Anne, but a tall man with a white shirt stained with red smudges. Chloe was taken aback and tried to close the door, but he forced it open, pushing her down on the ground in the same motion. He moved one hand to the right pocket of his pants, pulling out a knife that was still dripping with blood. In his other hand, he had a white box that he moved up to his lips, and when he spoke into it, out came the voice of Anne. "Surprise. Credit to David at the prize. Credit. When I was young, my grandmother used to tell me stories of her youth. When I was about the age of 14, she told me about her and my grandfather's time in a Polish city by the name of Będzin. She described Będzin as a quaint city. It had been where she first met my grandfather, where they married, and where they planned to live for the rest of their days. Their aspirations of a normal life were abruptly crushed in September of 1939 when Hitler's armies invaded. By 1940 their beloved hometown had been transformed into a dirty ghetto where my grandparents were forced to work in German munition factories. By late 1940 my grandparents realized that there were fewer workers each day and decided it was time to get out. As soon as they had the chance, they joined about 6 others going into hiding. They were welcomed into a local library where many others were supposedly hiding. The library had an attic where my grandparents believed some were hiding, but they were told that they would be staying in the basement with the other 6. The basement was behind an old bookcase that covered a small door that was just large enough for an adult to crawl through. The space was made up of 2 rooms, one with a few cots and the other filled with stacks of books. They stayed in those 2 rooms for years, living in secrecy, never venturing out of that trap door. The librarian delivered food and water every night along with new books. They lived in relative peace for those few years, save for the occasional clamor of the war above seeping through the thin wood over their heads. Eventually, the war caught up with them. The librarian had stopped bringing them food, fuel for their lanterns, and new reading material. There was no warning, only a loud blast, an earthquake-like shaking, and the sound of shattering glass and falling rubble. They had begun to ration what little food they had left. though the librarian had always brought them enough provisions to last them until the next night when he would return. After a day in the two-room basement, the food had run out and they decided that they would rather face the Nazis than stay down there and starve. They had tried the door but it was stuck. They didn't know whether it had been the bookcase still in front of it or if the building had collapsed and rubble blocked the door. But when they couldn't open or knock down the door, some of their group began to panic. Eventually they all returned to their cots, dejected and without hope, wondering whether they would ever get out of the basement. Their savior had become their damnation, and they had no way out. After about 2 days, the roof had begun to leak. The water was fetid and brown, but they had no other choice than to drink from the seemingly unending stream. The water had kept them alive, but it had also started to give those who drank it symptoms of some kind of sickness. As they drank, my grandparents showed some concern. They had tried to convince the others to wait until they had filtered it and boiled it from the heat of the lantern, but they had been so thirsty that they disregarded her warnings and drank straight from the leak. As my grandparents cleansed their water, the others had become anxious, confused and agitated, constantly scratching at an itch that seemed to not cease and enveloped their entire body. They had drunk the water for 2 days, and the others' symptoms had grown worse and worse over that short time. It was on the 3rd day that the others had grown too hungry. One of the others, a young woman of about 20 by the name of Cecilia, had pounced on an old woman named Agatha. Almost instantaneously, the others had joined in and pounced on the poor old woman. They tore into her with teeth and nails, biting into her jugular and spraying blood onto the floor around them. My grandfather had grabbed my grandmother and pulled her into the next room that had been filled with books and a single cot that they had moved shortly after they had first arrived. Knowing that they would eventually lose interest in the old woman, my grandfather began stacking the books against the door. Within 10 minutes, hundreds of books that they had accumulated over the years were stacked against the door, and what had happened had finally sunk in. My grandfather held my grandmother as she wept, and tried to console her, though he had no idea how. He had been just as frightened as she was, and had no idea how he would get them out of this. The sickening slurping and crunching of bones had ceased as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the sound of my grandmother's weeping and the sound of aimless footsteps from the other room. All of a sudden, the footsteps stopped. My grandmother's sobbing ceased as she pulled her head away from my grandfather's chest as they listened anxiously for the footsteps to continue. They sat in absolute silence for minutes, only the faint glow of the lantern providing them any solace. My grandmother sighed as she wiped tears from her eyes, and as soon as she did she heard rapid footsteps. They both jumped as something from the other side slammed into the wall. They heard another crash, and another, until the sound of splintering wood had begun to accompany it. With another loud crash, a piece of wood flew from the wall, and a large crack had run through the wall to the floor. The dim glow of the lantern on the other side of the wall shined through the hole, and though they waited for another loud crash, it never came. After what felt like hours of sitting and waiting for another crash, my grandmother decided to stand and approach the hole in the wall. It was only big enough to fit a finger through, and gave a partial view of the next room. As she peered through the hole, she saw a mass of bodies lying near each other, their chest rising and falling. She looked down and saw another body, lying on the ground with an indentation in its head and a small river of red coming from its now closed eyes. It was Cecilia. She had caved her head and charging at the wall. In the very end of her field of vision, she could see an arm. Nothing else, just an arm. The arm was wrinkled and pale, missing a few portions and covered in bite marks where the arm still had skin to show them. She slowly backed away from the hole and sat on the cot, returning to the arms of my grandfather. That night my grandfather put out the lantern in their room, wanting to conserve their fuel for as long as possible. Through the hole in the wall, she could see the faint glow of the other room's lantern. She stood up and looked through the hole once again and saw nothing different. The others were still sleeping in a large pile and the two bodies were untouched. She looked back at the pile where the others were sleeping and saw that now only 3 were lying there. She gasped and stepped back. She knew that there should be 4 of them there. They came in with 6 others, 2 were dead, so where was the last one? She looked around the room but saw nothing. The lantern began to flicker and its glow began to die, but she continued to study the room. As the lantern gave off its final seconds of light, she saw a shadow in the corner, standing and staring at her. She watched the shadow until the lantern went out a few seconds later. My grandmother never told me what had happened after that moment, just that they had pulled at the rotting wood above them, climbed out of the basement and saw a large pile of rats lying dead near a broken pipe spewing water. By the time they had escaped, the Russians had liberated Benjin and freed them of the Nazis' rule. My grandmother couldn't see her hometown in the same light after she had escaped the basement, so my grandfather bought a house in a small village in Bosnia. That's where they raised my mother, and where my mother raised me. My grandmother called them the Shadows of Benjin, what she thought to be a fitting name. I agree, those people were no longer human, they were hosts to a horrendous disease, just a shell of their former selves. I'm writing this because I now find myself in a similar situation. The year is 1993, and I am in hiding from the Scorpions paramilitary organization who have begun to ethnically cleanse Bosnia. I'm hiding with 8 others, and 20 minutes before I started writing this we heard a large explosion, followed by the sound of an earthquake, accompanied by the sound of rubble sliding and glass shattering. If I die, let it be known that the Shadows of Benjin have become the Shadows of Bosnia, but I was not one of them. I didn't drink the water, I didn't become a monster. Credit to Eric Clement Monster. Credit to. This story is based off of real events that happened to me and my family while on our second vacation to Scotland. Names might be changed to keep our privacy and some details might be wrong, but for the rest, everything is what happened. Oh, and we all survived. Smile. Tilda Casper. My parents dragged me towards the pillar where the tour guide would meet us. It was the second day of our 2-week vacation to Scotland and right now we were in the capital city of Edinburgh. Our hotel had given us a few tips and things to visit overnight and eventually, the 3 of us decided that we would go to the Mercat Ghost Tour in the Edinburgh dungeons. Exciting for the entire family, was what the hotel owner had said. In all honesty, I wasn't such a fan of ghost stories. I didn't like horror at all, actually. It was definitely not my favorite, nor could I take jump scares. So I wasn't that happy. My heart was pounding quite fast and if I were to see even the slightest scary thing, like a spider, I'd probably jump in my father's arms to hide. No shame, I'm a scaredy cat. It had gotten pretty late, and we were waiting at a small cafe with a nice view on the Mercat Pillar. Eventually, the tour guide arrived together with a German family of 4. The tour guide introduced himself and we started walking through the city. Edinburgh was beautiful. It was a pretty old city with a big history. The guide stopped every now and then at a building and told us an interesting story, before continuing on walking. The German family took pictures of everything while me and Mom listened carefully. Dad was taking pictures as well. We walked around the plaza, called the Edinburgh Mile, and after walking for a while we reached a small street, nearly hidden from the public. It was barely visible and we stopped to look around a bit. We were surrounded by houses and flats, 3 high each. The tour guide opened his bag and searched for the key to the building he'd take us in. After a while he found it. He opened the door and gestured us to enter. The guide grabbed a lantern and started walking down some stairs. We followed him down the cellar-like stairs and the door closed shut behind us. Shivers ran down my spine as it was getting colder as the night grew older. Also because we went lower and lower underground. I looked over my shoulder at the door and nearly bumped into my father because we came to a sudden stop. The guide turned around and creepily looked at us. The dungeons appeared to be discovered quite recently. They had been closed off and forgotten due to the criminal world seeking refuge and dealing in the underground. The government wanted none of it and thus they closed it. Years passed and the dungeons got forgotten. At least, until recently, when someone found them by accident at the construction site of some building. Mercat took the opportunity to make it into the ghost tour it was now. There were prop bodies and lights hidden throughout the dungeon, and if you listened carefully you could hear scary music playing in the distance. The guide focused his attention on us and started telling stories. I wasn't completely there though, I was distracted. I felt cold and somehow unsafe. I wanted to get out, even though there was nothing to worry about. I sought comfort in my mother's arms and tried to listen to the guide. But there was something, or someone, ominous around. I didn't feel secure. It was as if we were being watched from behind. We continued and got even deeper inside the dungeons as the guide took us to a closed-off section of the dungeons. It had been found by the workers of Mercat while cleaning out and preparing the dungeons for their tours. Apparently it was the safe route from the Edinburgh Castle to the outside world. The route had been forgotten and hidden for ages until they found it. Story goes that two of the castle's guards accidentally blew up the tunnel by firing the cannon, which indicated 1 o'clock at 1 a.m. instead of p.m. after having 1 or 2 beers too much. It fell off the wall and boom. Anyway, the tunnel was now closed off for visitors. Have I told you the story of room 17? Asked the tour guide. We all shook our heads, indicating he indeed hadn't. Very well. The guard put down the lantern on a rock and started his story. Again shivers ran down my spine, followed by a feeling of dread. I felt scared, anxious. But not unsafe. Not anymore. A long time ago, there was this hotel. Everybody forgot its name, location and city. But it's around the city of St. Andrews. The story goes the hotel had a haunted room, number 17. Of course, the room hadn't always been haunted. It started in the 16th century. On a late autumn night, a young lady appeared at the hotel. She seemed cold and looked for a room to stay the night. The hotel owner had one free room, number 17. The girl thanked him and immediately went upstairs to sleep for the night. The next morning, the girl wasn't awake for breakfast. She hadn't come down for lunch either. Even though every guest needs their privacy, the hotel owner was getting worried that something had happened to the girl. The man walked up the stairs and knocked on the room door. He waited for an answer, but it stayed awfully quiet. He knocked on the door again, this time a bit louder. Still no answer. The man was getting very worried about the mysterious female now, so he decided to grab the spare room key and unlock the door. He walked down the stairs again, but as he went down to grab the key, he heard airy whispers in his ear. He couldn't understand what they were saying, something about a man clothed in all black. This scared the old man. He grabbed the key to room number 17 and held it tight in his sweaty hands. He ran back up the stairs and knocked on the door one more time. No answer. He unlocked the door and turned the doorknob to the right. He carefully pushed open the door and called, "Miss? Excuse me, are you there?" He took a quick peek around the half-open door but couldn't see the bed yet. He now opened the door fully and walked in. On the bed, covered in a red pool of blood, the corpse of the mysterious female had been left for dead, murdered in cold blood. On the ceiling of the room was written "Help" in the woman's blood. The old man gasped in fear and called for the town guards. To this day nobody knows who murdered the girl. The hotel owner couldn't handle the feeling of guilt and closed the hotel for good. It wasn't until 50 years later when a young family bought the empty house. There were way too many rooms for them, so they decided it would be a good idea to make it into a hotel. So they did. But as the husband of the family inspected every single room, he found one room with a strange, scary atmosphere. He didn't feel safe at all in the room. He could swear he heard whispers in the room, telling him about a man clothed in black and murder. He shivered and shut the door. He numbered it room 17 and decided to never rent the room. The family earned good money off the room, but never ever let anyone rent room 17. The family got rich off of their hotel and the fantastic service. But never ever did they rent room 17. It turned spring, to summer, autumn, and winter again. But the winter was harsh and cold. Chances of surviving without food or a roof above your head were near to null. Every room in the hotel was full, except for room number 17. The weather outside was harsh, it was snowing and the wind was sharp. It was close to midnight and the family's husband was sitting in the bar drinking his final beer before closing the hotel door. Suddenly he could hear a weak knocking on the door. He grabbed a torch and opened the door. He looked straight into the eyes of the young woman and her child. They seemed very tired and cold. They were soaking wet of the snow and freezing. If he didn't let them in, they would surely freeze to death. The husband had pledged to never let anyone stay in room 17, but decided it was better to let them stay than letting them freeze to death. He led the woman in who thanked him dearly. He handed her the key to room 17 and shut the door. The woman and daughter went up the stairs and stayed the night in room 17. The husband went to his room and tried to sleep, but he couldn't. His heart was pounding in fear, yet he didn't know why. An hour passed and the man still couldn't fall asleep when suddenly he heard a loud screech. It sounded like it was from a woman. He lit a candle and ran up the stairs. Every hotel guest had awoken from their slumber by the loud scream and everyone was looking out of their room doors to see what had happened. Everyone, but room 17. The hotel owner was shaking from head to toe as he opened the door to room 17. He walked inside and saw the woman sitting on a chair in the middle of the room, her eyes fixed on the ceiling in fear. She was completely terrified and paralyzed in fear. The daughter was lying dead on the floor. The husband knew that he had made a mistake. Rumors spread across the country like wildfire and soon, the entire nation knew about the hotel and the haunted room. The husband was never renting the room, ever again. Not even when it was freezing outside. He pledged it against his wife, his son, his grandmother and everybody else. Never. Anyway, years passed and the hotel grew famous worldwide for its haunted room. Word reached the Vatican and a monk wanted to hear nothing of it. He thought it was all the biggest humbug and he was going to prove it with his own life. The monk traveled all the way to Scotland, to the hotel, just to prove it was all a hoax. The monk sought contact with the hotel owner and after discussing for a long while, the hotel owner decided to let the monk stay for one night, and one night only. The monk took his belongings inside the room and the owner gave him 2 bells. One huge bell, which he could ring if he was in trouble. Dog it would sound. And a small bell, for if he needed something to eat or drink. Ding. It would sound. Night fell over the city and the family's husband stayed awake for the night, scared of what might happen to the monk. For hours he waited, but nothing happened. The hotel owner's eyes grew heavy and he nearly fell asleep. Maybe he even did, until he got awoken by the sound of a bell. Ding. 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 It was the small bell, being ringed over and over again. It got quicker and quicker, so the husband slowly made his way up the stairs. Suddenly, the big bell rang. Dong. It sounded through the entire hotel. The husband now ran up the stairs and opened the room as quickly as he could. In the middle of the room, the monk was sitting in a chair, his eyes fixated on the ceiling in fear. In his hands, the small bell. In the corner of the room, the big bell. Way too far for him to have been able to ring it. The hotel owners were now certain of the room being haunted, by the mysterious woman who had been murdered there ages ago. The hotel closed, the room numbers disappeared. Nobody knows what and where it is nowadays. Have a good night. The tour guide led us out of the dungeon and we walked to the hotel together, still in shock of the finishing story as told by the guide. It was quite an amazing experience, yet we wouldn't want to do it again. Way too scary, especially so late at night. We arrived at our hotel and stayed the night. The day after, we drove from Edinburgh to Crail. Crail was a small fishing village located near Isle of May, famous for its huge population of puffins. We arrived at the hotel where we would stay the night. After walking around for the entire day, we made our way to the hotel and met up with the hotel owner. The year before, we'd been there as well and the man still remembered us. He was very nice and kind, and loved whiskey. Just like every real Scot. He told us stories about when he was younger. The owner took us to our room, which he had reserved especially for us. It was a big room with a nice view on the sea. Strangely enough, it had no number on the door. I suddenly got a flashback of the year before, when we stayed here as well. We were having breakfast and got in a conversation with a man and women who had stayed the night in a room with no number. They'd had some weird experiences in the room. The woman woke up in the middle of the night because she felt something next to her, but her husband was gone. The bed was empty. Somehow, the husband had gone walking in his sleep and found his way to the stairs next to the bathroom. That's at least what they told. Anyway, the owner gave us the key and walked back downstairs with us. After more stories and folklore, he went to bed and we were left alone. It was getting midnight and the three of us decided to play a card game, called Last Card Plus. My father had always been the more skeptical of us three when it came to ghosts. He didn't really believe in them. As we played the game, he started telling jokes about the tour yesterday. Neither Mom nor I liked it, since we did believe in ghosts. But whatever. We finished the first of 7 rounds. Mom won. Dad and I had to count the score of our leftover cards. I had 6 points and Mom wrote it down. I looked at Dad who had a weird grin on his face. He showed me his cards and I looked at the score of the cards together. 17. Mom and I glanced at each other and laughed nervously. But the second round ended with Dad having 17 points. Again. His smile disappeared. At the third round, his smile was completely gone and at the end we counted our leftover points again. Dad's face had turned white now. 17 points, 3 times in a row. And at that moment the lights went out a row. And at that moment the lights went out a row. And at Beatrice. Hubert yelled angrily from the kitchen table. How many times I gotta remind you that I want my gravy on the mashed potatoes only? Never on my chicken. Beatrice stood silently wide-eyed near the kitchen sink, as her faded floral dress hanging loosely from her thin frame. Her tawny shoulder doll hair did little to accentuate her bland features as she continued to stare at her husband blankly. Her mouth was always slightly agape and her eyes tended to exude a far-off stare, often giving one the impression that she was not the brightest. Hubert rolled up his soil-stained shirt sleeves with annoyance. As he grabbed onto his overall straps he leant back in his cold metal chair. "Beatrice, look at this woman," he said as he coolly grabbed a biscuit from off his dinner plate. "It's cold. And my sweet tea which is supposed to be cold is warm." He threw the biscuit on the plate in disgust as he snapped, "Can't you do anything right? Especially after I work so hard to take care of you. This is what I get, garbage." Beatrice gently patted forward across the linoleum floor. "I can throw it out to the pigs, if you don't want it," she said timidly. "I'm sorry," she added as she dropped her head low. Give this to the pigs?" snorted Hubert. "What, and poison the animals? No way." Grumbling under his breath to himself, he leaned forward and picked up his fork and knife. He continued, "I'll eat this trash. But if I ever keel over someday, you'll know why, Beatrice. Take some notes from one of those cooking shows or something. And for Pete's sake, where's the butter?" Beatrice continued to wait upon every whim of Hubert as he finished his meal under the pale fluorescent light bulbs. This was a standard evening within the Wilkin household. Hubert was a rather unsavory man to come across and often kept to himself. He refused to take part of society beyond the standard business on his farm. Beatrice herself was limited by him on when she was allowed to so much as leave the house for a trip to the local supermarket. Quite the controlling man, he allowed no one into their lives and never ventured outside of their small circle of privacy. To him, everyone was an imbecile and he had no time for idiots. Later that same evening, chatter and laughter echoed from the small television set in the living room. Faint brown wallpaper splattered with little patterns of cacti adorned their living room walls. A small clock on the wall ticked on as Hubert lounged in his favorite dusty armchair. Beatrice soaped and scrubbed away dutifully at the dishes in the kitchen all the while. Suddenly the doorbell rang. "It's 9 o'clock at night," yelled Hubert exasperatedly. Who in their right mind would come all the way out here to bother a man within the comfort of his own home? Beatrice had come to stand near the armrest of the sofa out of curiosity. Hubert lazily heaved himself out of his chair. Cocking and loading his shotgun, he sauntered to the front door. "What do you want?" questioned Hubert as he threw open the door. The porch light flickered as moths flew into the light, their frying in the heat emitting the only sound around them in the night air. Hubert looked around and saw no one. "What's that, Hubert?" Beatrice was now by his side wearing a puzzled look upon her face. Directly in front of them sat a small black wooden box. Hubert bent down and lifted the lid. Blue silk lined the inside of the box. An old parchment-styled flyer gently rested upon the contents of the box. Raising the flyer to the light, he read aloud. "In honor of the town's favorite farmer with the best produce, you are cordially invited to the Blue Corn Moon Festival as guest of honor. Your special night of honor shall be celebrated on Saturday the 22nd at 7 p.m. It is the night of the wolf. The enclosed necklace is a gem passed down from our ancestors. It is reserved only for the most honorable of our society. It is to be worn during the celebration. Warmest regards. The town of Rose Rock." "You see that, Beatrice?" exclaimed Hubert as he withdrew the necklace from the box. "Everyone around here appreciates all my hard work." "Guest of honor," relished Hubert as he placed the leather strap around his neck. A smooth oval stone dangled round the center of his chest. "Hubert, it's glowing," said Beatrice wide-eyed as she gazed at his necklace. Swirling white and blue light emitted from the stone. Hubert smiled greedily as he patted the stone. A smooth breeze blew through the warm night air. Hubert sniffed the air and shouted, "Beatrice, I suppose you had decided burning my dessert would be a great way to finish my night off, right? Get your butt in that kitchen and do it right this time." Beatrice hopped at her shouting and was already in the kitchen before he had finished yelling. Leaving the box on the ground, the screen door creaked on its hinges. He slammed the house door shut behind him and resumed his place in front of the TV for the night. The night of the 22nd had arrived. And it was now 6:30 p.m. "Beatrice, move it!" Hubert shouted as he started the ignition to his rusty old truck. The engine rumbled as he sat waiting impatiently. Beatrice hurried down the front steps and slid quietly into her seat. Her hair had been neatly braided to one side, a purple flower adorning her ear. She had even had time to apply some basic makeup for once. It made a tremendous difference, which made Hubert feel slightly uncomfortable. She gave a weak smile with her pale pink lips as he eyed her floral lavender dress. "Well," began Hubert, "you look nice." He put the truck in drive and sped out of their dirt driveway as he added, "For once, you won't be a complete embarrassment." Her smile fell as they drove down the road toward the center of town. A series of large elaborate streamers of blue, white, and silver were dangling from every golden glowing street light. A large decadent sign hung above the main street entrance to the town square of Rose Rock which read, "Blue Corn Moon Festival." Hubert had parked the truck alongside the road, and Beatrice followed him as they proceeded on foot to the center of the festivities. Confetti littered the streets as they made their way towards the large crowd before them. The entire town of Rose Rock had gathered together. Children laughed and chased one another about with blazing sparklers in their hands. Women in their finest dresses discussed recipes over a large spread of homemade pies. Groups of people bobbed for apples out of old wash tubs, as old women sampled one another's homemade preserves and jams. The men of the town had mostly gathered round the barrels of Rose Rock ale. Laughing raucously, the men clinked their mugs together in cheers. A clown on stilts cut through the joyful crowd as a group of jugglers followed in his path. Hubert smoothed his hair to the side as the mayor of Rose Rock spotted him and exclaimed for all to hear, "Mr. Hubert Wilkin, our treasured guest of honor. Please, follow me. We have a beautiful evening prepared in celebration of our community's finest contributor." Hubert chuckled shyly as he shrugged off the compliment. "Oh no, truly only the finest candidates are even considered for such a special occasion. And you have been deemed worthy by the whole town as the guest of honor for tonight. Please, come," motioned the mayor as he led Hubert and Beatrice to their seats. The awkward couple were seated on stage in the center of the festival. As the mayor announced Hubert's arrival via microphone, the town sounded with roars of joy from all sides. A cream-colored awning dripped in decorative white lights and shaded Hubert and Beatrice under the late-night sky. They reclined peacefully in plush cushioned chairs provided for them. Sumptuous town dishes and desserts were laid before them as Hubert's glass was repeatedly emptied and immediately refilled with the crisp cold ale. A series of performances were held throughout the night as Hubert enjoyed his place above the rest of the town. He was clearly the best man in town, he knew it, and now the whole town agreed he was too. Clown acts, children's plays, frenzied eating competitions, strongest man barrel lifting, time corn shucking, and best face paint competitions were all judged by Hubert. The night stretched on, and hours later all of the food, ale, and excitement had finally made Hubert's eyes grow wary. He was ready to go lay in his beckoning bed at home. Hubert stood, stretched his legs and yawned. The mayor quickly made his way over to Hubert's side. "Is there anything I can get for you, Mr. Wilkin?" "Nah," yawned Hubert again. "I'm just real tired. I think I'm ready to call it a night now and head on back home." "Oh, no, no, no," gasped the mayor as he gently pushed Hubert down into his seat. Hubert looked at the fat old mayor bewilderedly. "There is one last special performance which has been made specifically for you. Please, enjoy the show. Then you may go if you like afterwards." "Well, all right," Hubert agreed with some annoyance as he remained seated. The mayor walked over to the microphone. "All right, Rose Rock," said the mayor. "It's time." With that, the mayor walked off stage. Everyone grew silent, not a sound was made. 4 men walked on stage and removed the awning. Other attendants removed the table and Beatrice was whisked off into the crowd. The town rock for which it was named was brought on stage, a red boulder that was smooth all along the top. Hubert was pulled from his chair and guided by 2 men to sit atop the boulder. Baffled, Hubert sat quietly facing the crowd. The moon was at its largest, high into the night sky. The beams of light made the necklace around his neck glow an even brighter shade of blue. "Hey!" shouted Hubert to the crowd. "What's going on here?" Not even crickets chirping in the grass could be heard. This some kind of weird joke or something? Silence met his ears. Then, the crowd stirred. Far in the back, the crowd parted into all the way to the front of the stage where Hubert sat. He could see a lone figure walking slowly towards him. As he watched the figure draw near, he saw that it was an Indian chief. The man wore a large hat and loincloth of matching blue and red feathers. Green face paint smeared his cheeks and pointed nose. Looking solemnly up at Hubert, the chief's deep black eyes bored into his. The chief removed a dead chicken dangling from his side and slit its throat. He waved the chicken rhythmically back and forth as it sprayed blood on the rock where Hubert sat. The chief began chanting in a language Hubert could not understand. The chief removed kernels of corn from a small pouch and threw them into the blood at the base of Rose Rock. "What in the hell kind of show is this supposed to be?" yelled Hubert angrily. "Long ago when our ancestors settled this land," the mayor explained from a gazebo loudly for all to hear, "they had to make a deal. To appease the spirits that claimed this land, a blood sacrifice is required once a year. The night of the wolf is the night of the required sacrifice. You see," went on the mayor now facing in Hubert's direction, "you are the lucky candidate chosen for the job this year. It is quite an honor, Mr. Wilkin." Hubert's head had begun to spin and he felt unnaturally sluggish and dizzy. A thick purple mist had begun to creep in on all sides of the town. "Feeling a little lightheaded?" questioned the mayor with a chuckle. The whole town let out a loud peal of laughter. Hubert grabbed his head as he slumped to his side on the rock. "No!" shouted Hubert, "no!" The laughter continued to fill his ears. "Oh, don't worry about the dizziness, Mr. Wilkin, that's just from all the drugs we put in all your food and drink tonight," exclaimed the mayor wearing a grin from ear to ear. The purple mist had completely swallowed the town. Hubert could only see the crowd now. Everything around had faded. Suddenly the crowd fell silent as the rumbles of growls could be heard. Hundreds of glaring yellow eyes peered out from the mist at the crowd. The stone around his neck glowed brilliantly as the eyes followed the blue glow through the mist, like ships in a storm to a lighthouse. The crowd continued to watch as the army of massive wolves gathered on stage encircling Hubert. A wolf jumped onto his chest and howled loudly at the moon as the mist immediately retreated. "Nah, ooh ooh ooh," screamed Hubert as the wolves tore into his flesh from all angles. Unable to move now, the farmer was utterly defenseless. The now clear sky and bright moon lit the entire event as the crowd remained stock still. "Beatrice!" shouted Hubert, for he had spotted her in the crowd. "Beatrice!" he yelled once again, extending a bloody hand. "Help me!" The wolves continued to snarl and rip away at him. Beatrice snapped the clasp on her purse open and reaching and said, "Well, I remembered the butter this time for you." She proceeded to throw some sticks of butter that hit him squarely in the face. "It felt like centuries waiting for this night," said Beatrice as she rolled her eyes and nudged a friend beside her. Eruptions of laughter broke out throughout the crowd. The chief turned and exited through the parted crowd quietly into the night. The townspeople watched on with amusement as they waited for the spirits of the wolves to complete their ritual feast upon Rose Rock. Credit to Miss Ivory's Rock. Credit to Miss Ivory's Rock. I woke up that Saturday morning to an unexpected breeze, cool and pleasant, against my cheek. I kept a fan on myself while I slept during the warmer seasons, but the fan was packed deep in my closet during the heart of winter. I wiped my eyes and looked towards the source of the breeze. A yellow blur blocked some of the blinding light that broke through the sheer curtains. As my vision regained clarity, the yellow blur morphed into a lovely flower with 6 large, yellow petals. Before college, I would have been terrified of waking up to a strange flower on my chest, but maturity left me more curious than scared. After meeting my best friend, Chelsea, a female sleight-of-hand magician, I had grown more willing to accept the unexpected. The flower was part of some intricate trick she would surprise me with later in the week. It was the only explanation that made sense, therefore I assumed it to be the correct one. I made it through high school without uttering the love word to any of my boyfriends, as my friends were so hasty to brag about doing. When it came to romance, it wasn't something I let take over my life. My reputation around campus as an ice queen wasn't entirely accurate, but it didn't bother me. It helped me avoid the dating scene and keep a focus on my GPA. My plan was set, and I was the only one responsible for executing it. I was not a prude, but I was a realist. No spontaneous college guy would waste random romantic gestures on the control freak. Even if there was interest, a warm fire or a heated blanket were more romantic than any flower this far north. Winter wasn't for color, it was for comfort. Still, it was a pretty flower. The flower seemed healthy, but I could smell nothing. My nose was ice cold, and a fresh gust of air made me very aware of the liquid that was dripping from it. The breeze was coming from the window, open about an inch. I closed the window and touched my nose. My hands, warm from being tucked under my pillow, recoiled from the touch of my cold nose. It was no wonder I couldn't smell the flower. I set the flower on my nightstand, hoping a long hot shower would clear my head and warm up my nose enough to smell it. I saw a notification for a few unanswered texts from Chelsea, but I needed to wake up first. Chelsea was the sober sorority sister of Phi Sigma Sigma, and my best friend. She had never touched a drop of alcohol in her life and never planned to, though she had a sense of humor about it. Why? Was a question she heard often and used as a way to challenge her ability to think quick. She claimed various rules of various religions at first before moving on to secret societies called tenets, forcing her to keep clean for her master. For the past month, she has used that question as a study aid for her death in society class. She would claim that the victims of insert serial killer's name here were drunk and that she didn't want to make herself an easy target. After recounting some of the more gruesome details from memory, even the most practiced partiers would spend more time eyeing their drinks and fellow party guests with suspicion than imbibing. She was passing the class with flying colors. Chelsea was a sleight-of-hand magician, and Penn and Teller were her idols. Neither had ever taken a drink of alcohol, and neither ever would, for no reason other than they didn't want to. She liked the idea and spent her time practicing sleight of hand by herself while other kids her age practiced the handsy stuff on each other. I was the control freak, she was the perfectionist, and both of us avoided deep relationships in lieu of our own personal interests and hobbies. We were best friends a week into English 301. Chelsea was the designated driver, cock-blocker and general caretaker when the Phi Sigma 6 went to parties. She asked for three things as payment: gas money, permission to perform magic tricks for the guys who struck out with us, and allowance to film any embarrassing shit we did, with a clause that none of it ended up on YouTube. I never got drunk enough to go viral, but New Year's Eve was the one night of the year I caged the control freak completely. That Saturday was January 1st. I assumed Chelsea was the reason I woke up with a cracked window and a strange flower instead of a cracking headache and a strange frat boy. None of the normal signs of a hangover dragged me down, and silently praised Chelsea for whichever of her magic tricks had prevented the normal symptoms. I remembered nothing. The hot shower was fantastic. The hair on my legs was longer than I expected, considering I had shaved prior to party the night before. An ex-boyfriend used to swear that his facial hair always seemed to grow in thicker and quicker after a night of heavy drinking. Not caring much about the cause, I recycled the diagnosis and slathered conditioner on my legs. After I washed and conditioned my hair, I turned the shower head to pulse and stood under the water, enjoying the sensation of water massaging the back of my neck while my hair draped over my face like a hot towel. One of the perks of a private dorm room: no roommate, no sharing the hot water. After I brushed my hair and teeth, I returned to my bed to check my missed messages when 3 loud, rapid knocks pounded at my door. After the third knock, a sheet of paper slid through the gap at the bottom of my door. This was how the sorority passed along warnings about secret dorm inspections or frivolous gossip we didn't trust texting. It was quick and anonymous. No one ever knew who was knocking. For secretive note passing, those 3 knocks were obnoxious in volume and left a feeling of creeping dread clinging to each and every goosebump that ran up my spine. That cold gape of unease never stayed with me until the end. Much later, I realized what was so unsettling about the situation. 1. My door was the only one that had been knocked on. 2. I had heard no footsteps approaching, or leaving, for that matter, even though the floors in our building creaked if somebody so much as coughed. I left the note on the floor, as if to punish it for ruining my calm. I checked that the padlock was in the locked position, a useless, but helpful symbol of safety, before I picked up my phone to check the text messages from Chelsea. The knocking returned most of the pre-shower tension. My subconscious would expect more knocking for hours just to avoid surprise if it happened again. The stress made it impossible to relax. I paced around the room as I checked my phone. First I caught up on emails, the last of which was also from Chelsea. It contained an image that failed to download no matter how many times I touched the retry button. I let it be and scrolled through the text messages instead. These were the last few messages on my phone. Me, see you in 5, doll. December 31st 2014 8:29 p.m. Chelsea, who is that guy? Why is he trying to give you a flower? Can I do a trick on him, or does he have potential? December 31st 2014 9:42 p.m. Me, says his name is Ray. Never seen him before, but Anna thinks he's cute, so no tricks yet. December 31st 2014 9:44 p.m. Chelsea, do his eyes look strange to you, or are you too drunk to notice? December 31st 2014 9:45 p.m. Chelsea, Brit, where the hell did you go? December 31st 2014 9:59 p.m. Chelsea, hello? Are you in the bathroom? You need to practice so you aren't puking drunk after one angry orchard. Just tell me if you find a ride or not. This party is LAME. December 31st 2014 10:49 p.m. Chelsea, Brit, seriously, where are you? I can't find Melody or Sarah. Ray keeps looking at me and his eyes are seriously fucked up. I'm getting creeped out. January 01th 2015 1:11 a.m. Chelsea, holy FVKBRT, you found Melody, she's passed out or SMTHNG. Where are you? January 01th 2015 1:42 a.m. Chelsea, Brit, Answer me. January 01th 2015 1:56 a.m. Chelsea 6 love I peels do eshe love me or do eshe not 6 love I peels do eshe love me or do eshe not 6 love I peels do eshe love me or do eshe not 6 love I peels do eshe love me or do eshe not 6 love I peels do eshe love me or do eshe not. January 01th 2015 4:03 a.m. By the time I read the last message, the chills in my back had returned tenfold. My frantic pacing caused my thighs to ache. I made a mental note to call Melody later and make sure she was feeling better, but I needed to see Chelsea. Chelsea didn't just lose her cool. Ever. Getting us safely back to our rooms, passed out or otherwise, was what Chelsea did. She didn't freak out over it, especially not to the point of it silencing her inner grammar Nazi. She had grown used to me shortening a couple of words and not using capital letters, but anything beyond that meant repercussions. More terrifying than those 3 knocks were the last 3 text messages. The first, broken and misspelled, like a drunk text sent to an ex-booty call. She would have ignored me for a weekend on principle had I sent it to her. The second, all capital letters with exclamation points for emphasis. That would have earned me a public conversation where she yelled at me just so my ears and shame could be uncomfortable as her eyes had been reading it. And the third message. One long string of lowercase letters. Gibberish at first, but after reading it back a few times it repeats the same message 6 times. 6 lovely petals. Does she love me or does she not? I had no idea what the fuck that was supposed to mean, or why Chelsea would have sent it. My phone beeped and I had a fear spasm, as if I'd run into an invisible wall. A small arrow appeared at the top of my cell phone screen signifying a successful download. I forced myself to stand still and calm down before I opened it. The morning was spiraling into some sort of hell thanks to my inner control freak. I hoped a cricket chirping wouldn't cause me to piss myself at the rate I was going. The download was the image Chelsea had sent me, called Night 15 6 petals. I don't know how long I sat with my thumb hovering over that text, unsure whether or not I had the guts left to open that image. I had to talk myself into thinking that it was some elaborate prank on Chelsea's part to get back at me for disappearing on her last night. It took me longer to open it than I'm comfortable admitting. The picture proved that Chelsea was not responsible for the flower. It was a picture of the 6 of us, the Phi Sigma 6. From left to right, we were Melody, Sarah, Jolene, Anastasia, Chelsea, and me. All of us had yellow flowers behind our ears, and each one of those yellow bastards had 6 petals. I glanced at the flower on my nightstand for a moment. Perhaps it was the fear, or seeing that all 6 of us had received one, but it no longer seemed beautiful or special. I sure as hell didn't have the urge to smell it anymore. Unable to keep still, I began pacing again. I glanced at the piece of paper on the floor. I wanted to look at that piece of paper about as much as I wanted to smell the flower, though I knew I would eventually look. I had to look. To take control. I looked back to the picture. 6 of us smiling, unsure of the shenanigans the night still held. My eyes moved past our flower-framed faces to the mirror behind us. In it, I saw the man who had taken the picture. He held Chelsea's phone level with his chin. The flash in the mirror left little of his face recognizable and made his hand look thin, almost skeletal. His eyes, unaffected by the flash, were completely visible. Chelsea had been right about Ray. His eyes were as disturbing as Chelsea's texts described. Something was wrong with them. The whole of each eye looked black. Most people would have assumed the man wore contacts, but the blackness looked like deep, empty holes. The irises floated against the blackness like the rims of buckets floating at the bottom of the well. All 6 of us had red eye from the flash, but Ray's eyes were matte. The flash didn't just not touch them, it seemed to actively avoid them. It could have been bad Photoshop. I wish I could say that, at any point, I had believed it was bad Photoshop. Whether it was the growing fear in my gut or a trick from staring at the screen too long, I saw the eyes move, those pale irises staring right at me. and let out a high-pitched shriek as I shoved the phone deep within the depths of my pillow pile. I was done with cryptic texts and strange images. I couldn't stop pacing. Again, I wanted to convince myself that Chelsea was trying out a new, albeit disturbing, magic trick on me. She had a tendency to surprise me with small pieces of tricks instead of running me through the patter and show of it all. This was the finale of a good trick. It would explain the black, hollow eyes that light avoided, how the text set up finding the picture, how the picture seemed to download on its own when I finished the texts. It all made sense if I could accept that Chelsea, as a magician, had secrets that she just couldn't share. Once I saw the trick pieced together, it would all make sense. Any other truth would break me. At some point I had stopped pacing and had picked up the piece of paper. I was staring at the blank backside of it as I left my thoughts. Confused emotions made me dizzy while fear and reason, the angel and a devil on my shoulder, fought for control of my hands, fought for control of that precious, terrifying sheet of paper. The devil on my shoulder could that turning it over would reveal the secret and give me the answer Chelsea could not. The angel, meek but loud, screamed that turning it over meant I could never not turn it over. I had always thought that my controlling nature made me a rational person, if a bit distant, but I was learning that fear turns a person's every trait into a weapon. I was as naive and stupid as any horror movie character I had yelled at over the years, because I could not let myself remain naive and stupid. I had to know. To take control. I turned the piece of paper over. 5 confirmed dead, 1 still missing after serial killer strikes campus New Year's Eve party. By Neil Palmer. January 3, 2015. It has been 3 days since the Acacia Fraternity New Year's Eve party ended and 2 more students have been tragically added to the list of deceased. The bodies of Anastasia Higgins and Chelsea Fogg were found in their respective dorm rooms this morning, despite campus being under 24-hour surveillance and closed to all non-police and federal authorities as of January 1. The rooms of all 6 sorority sisters have been secured and are under observation. Melody Simmons and Sarah Rowland were found on the morning of January 1 by pledges assigned to aid them after the New Year's Eve party. Jolene Roberts' body appeared in her bed the next day. There were no signs of forced entry and no reports of suspicious activity from officers on duty. Miss Higgins and Miss Fogg each had strange yellow flowers on their chests, as with the previous victims. 2 of the petals on Miss Fogg's flower had been removed, leaving 4 petals. 1 petal had been removed from of Miss Higgins, leaving 5. Though the flower has not yet been identified, the picture below, pulled this morning off of Miss Fogg's phone, show that each flower has 6 petals. Authorities suspect that whoever was responsible for the flowers may have information and urge anybody with information to call 911 or the provided anonymous tip line as quickly as possible. In the middle of the page was the picture that Chelsea had emailed me, displaying the 6 of us smiling with those fucking flowers behind our ears. I wouldn't let myself look at Ray's face again. I forced myself to read on, despite tears blurring my vision. Brittany Davidson is the last member of the Phi Sigma 6 who remains unaccounted for. If criminal profiler theories that this is the work of a serial killer can be trusted, Miss Davidson represents one more potential victim. Finding her is paramount to both saving her life and catching the person responsible for the deaths of her 5 sisters. If anybody has any information regarding the whereabouts of Brittany Davidson, please call the aforementioned numbers. A service for the Phi Sigma 6 will be held as soon as the campus is reopened to the staff and students. Until then, free grief counseling and student support is being offered at the local YMCA. Our thoughts and sympathies are with the families of all 6 young women and anyone else whose lives they have touched. There was a picture of me on the bottom of the page, and some phone numbers. I let the paper fall to the floor as my breath caught in my chest. My sisters were dead. My best friend was dead. The grief I felt for them, and the fear I should have felt knowing that I was next, both punctuated by the date at the top of the page. It was January 3rd. I had been lost for 3 days, which meant that I had lost 3 days. Somehow, I had ended up back in my own bed, The same as my sorority sisters. I hope nobody had stuffed a piece of paper underneath any of their doors. I hoped that they had gone peacefully in their sleep. I hoped they had been ignorant to the fear coursing through me knowing that I was next. 3 knocks, much louder than the first, crumbled my nerves. The chills running up my spine grew hot with adrenaline. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't help myself from whimpering in short, ugly bursts. I turned towards my bed, ready to leap for the phone under my pillows and call 911. I couldn't take the first step. What I saw stopped the chills, the tears, the whimper, my breathing and time itself, for all I knew. The window was cracked about an inch. The yellow flower with the 6 pretty petals was no longer on my night table. The yellow flower sat on my chest in the perfect spot to obstruct my vision if I were to open my eyes. Not a single petal had been removed. The room had become claustrophobic and surrealistic in a hurry. I wasn't sure if the version of me, who I thought of as the real me, was asleep or dead. I wasn't sure if I was a ghost, a dream, or having an out-of-body experience. I had been vulnerable to whatever monster was responsible for the death of my friends the entire time, and I had been ignorant of that until I read the damn article. In trying to grasp control, I had broken the illusion and lost all of it. As vulnerable as the real me lying in bed was, the part of me stuck staring at her would be the part that suffered. I envied her, the real me lying in that bed, relaxed and oblivious. She hadn't spent the morning pacing around her room, slowly losing her mind. She hadn't learned that her best friends had died. She had no idea that she would never be waking up, if she wasn't already dead. The door behind me creaked as it opened. My entire body felt as cold as my nose had been. The adrenaline was gone, no longer warming my limbs. Something more than fear froze me in place. All I felt was cold. I would not move. I could not move. Each shallow exhale turned into a thick cloud of fog in front of my face. My eyes were wide open and drying out in the intense cold. The room itself seemed to turn gray the colder I got. I heard a hiss behind me and a large cloud fog flew past my head, overtaking one of my own small breath clouds. I could not react to whatever was behind me. Rather, it was out of fear or something the thing behind me had done to me. I would never know. My bladder let loose to punctuate my lack of body control. The fresh piss felt like ice water as it flowed down my leg. It didn't even take a cricket chirping. A yellow blur slowly crept over my shoulder from my left peripheral. As my vision regained clarity, the yellow blur morphed into an ugly flower with one large, decayed yellow petal. My entire body was ice cold, but this time I could smell it, something like nail polish remover and moldy bread and sweet rot. Holding the stem of the flower was a pale hand that looked thin and skeletal at first. I was wrong. The hand wasn't skeletal, it was a skeleton's hand. A voice behind me spoke, a deep whisper louder than any of the knocks. 6 lovely petals. Does she love me or does she not? No control. I looked at my body one last time and offered a silent apology. I was going to be the reason we died, and I could do nothing to stop it. I was powerless. Powerless to resist the second skeleton hand as it grabbed my wrist and raised my hand to the flower. Powerless to stop my fingers from pinching that last yellow petal and plucking it off. Powerless to stop myself from saying I love you not. I woke up that Saturday morning to an unexpected breeze, cool and pleasant, against my cheek. Somewhere within the whoosh of the wind blowing through my window, I swear I heard a deep whisper. Good choice. Credit to Robbie Nichols' voice. Credit to Robbie Nichols' voice. Credit to Robbie Nichols' voice.